From the KSL Broadcast House, this is Sunday Edition with Doug Wright.
And a good morning to you. Welcome to Sunday Edition. Today on the program, we're going to dive into the wide-reaching impact of the rail workers' bill that was signed by President Biden before the weekend. The bill ended a difficult rail dispute and helped to avoid what could have been an economic catastrophe. Plus, Utah voters approved several bonds that were on the ballot in November's midterm election, one in Davis County for $475 million to build new schools and improve the old ones, and another one right here in the capital city of Salt Lake City for $85 million to fund more parks and trails and projects in the city. We're going to talk about the impact of the Davis County bond a little later on in the program, but first, I want to bring on a very special guest, Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall, to talk about Salt Lake City residents and their approval of the Parks and Trails Bond. And Mayor, first of all, it's really a pleasure to have you join us. Thank you for making the time. And boy, this did not pass by a squeak. 71% of the residents of our capital city said yes to this one.
Yeah, we were thrilled with the results. And actually, they were consistent with the polling we'd done about 9 months prior to that November election. But, you know, a lot of things have happened, and the cost of living crisis has continued and even grown. So we were more than pleased to see that 1% more than we'd polled 9 months earlier said, yeah, we do want to invest in better parks, and more access to them with better trails.
Salt Lake City, of course, is my hometown. And I'll tell you, I was really pleased when I read about some of the priorities for this money. You hit some real sweet spots with me. And Sugar House Park, I was raised in the Sugar House area, so Sugar House Park and Fairmont Park. But you and I were talking prior to going on the air. I have a real soft spot. I went to Westminster College. And when I was growing up, Allen Park, we used to call it Hobbitville back in the day. To think that that is going to not just kind of be plowed over and developed, but it's going to remain a treasure for Salt Lake City, that means a lot to all of us. It means a lot to me.
Yeah, it's one of the longest stretches of that open creek corridor. You know, we've buried most of our 7 canyon creeks that flow along the Salt Lake County portion of the Wasatch Front. And that's one of the longest stretches that's still there and open. It was on the market and even under contract a couple times for private development. And I was so happy back in 2020 when we were able to wedge in there and be able to buy that property up and make sure that it became a public asset. I grew up here too, Doug. I remember kind of sneaking in there and getting into Hobbitville and not being welcome to do so. And Salt Lake City welcoming to anybody in the public who wants to walk in there now, but it's going to get even better with this investment through the bond.
Going way back in the history of my family and even for Salt Lake City, much of our family, it started on the west side of Salt Lake. And what is planned for the Granary area and what is planned for the Jordan River Parkway, there are all kinds of things. Maybe you could very quickly run us through what some of the priorities are.
Yes, you will see at the Fleet Block, which is that block in the Granary District between 9th South and 8th South, 3rd West and 4th West. The city owns about 85% of that block. It will be developed, and there will be a park component, which had a great deal of funding, $6 million in the bond to help make that happen. The 9-line trail is being built already without the bond that will connect as you go west and east on 9th South. But imagine west with me, and we get to the Jordan River Parkway Trail. There's going to be improvements all along the Jordan River Parkway, in removing invasive species, planting new trees, cleaning up some of the area. But the biggest investment in the entire bond package is a new regional park on the west side. The west side doesn't have a regional park. There are more kids per capita on the city's west side. And as we continue to grow and see density increases, it is time for us to build one. We haven't done it in over 60 years. We have got Liberty Park and Sugar House Park, as you know, and now we will have Glendale Regional Park, which is at the former Raging Waters site on 17th South.
Yeah, that is such a great use of that space, and to keep it a gathering place for the residents of the west side of Salt Lake City, I think is terrific. And then also you mentioned Liberty Park. I understand there are plans there for an all-inclusive playground.
That's right. The Liberty Park playground is well loved and it has a lot of wear and tear. from all of that love. It's going to be completely replaced. It'll be accessible for all abilities. And I hope personally that we also see that kind of access and a really fantastic playground at the Glendale Regional Park as well.
Something else that is mentioned here that really caught my attention was the canopy of the city, the tree canopy of Salt Lake City. You know, when you go into some of our great neighborhoods and you do just see the greenery all around you and trees are everywhere, what a difference that makes, not only for the feel of the community and the livability of the community, but for the environment. That's an interesting target. How do you plan to work on that?
Actually, independent of the bond, my administration has been planting 1,000 extra trees on our city's west side every year. So we just planted our 3,000th tree because it's the end of my third year in office, and we'll do it again next year. But the reason for that is manyfold, as you've kind of alluded to. It's beautiful. It's representative of our historic neighborhoods, but it increases property values, walkability, decreases heating and cooling costs in households. And if you could zoom out to Salt Lake City on a Google satellite image, you're going to see where we need more trees, and it's the west side. We still plant about 1,100 trees throughout the city, as we always have, but we're doubling down on growing that forest on our west side, and we're going to keep doing it there.
Mayor, I so appreciate the conversation about this bond. I understand it has a 20-year life, but before we move on to another segment of the program today, you alluded to the fact that you've been in office for 3 years. Now that we're past the midterm, one of the off-year elections is for Salt Lake City Mayor. Let's talk about the upcoming race and maybe your thoughts on how the dynamics may have changed from what you might have anticipated now that the former mayor of Salt Lake City, Rocky Anderson, has announced he's running for your position.
You know, nothing really changes for me. I'm focused on governing, on managing this city, on keeping people safe, on improving our lives every day. I've got an amazing team I work with, and the city is cranking right now. So their campaigns are long enough. There'll be plenty of time for campaigning next year. But right now, my focus is on governing.
Mayor, we so appreciate you joining us on the program. As I already mentioned, I hope that you and yours just have a terrific holiday season. And boy, there's nothing like being in the heart of Salt Lake City, downtown Salt Lake City during the holidays. Thank you for being part of it.
Thanks. It's always a pleasure to be on, Doug. Thank you very much.
Coming up next, when we come back, we'll be diving into the impact of the rail workers bill that passed late last week. We'll be talking with the inland port about that, so stay with us.
Our nation's rail system is literally the backbone of our supply chain, as you all well know, and so much of what we rely on is delivered on our rail, from clean water to food and gas and every other good. Rail shutdown would have devastated our economy.
And welcome back. On this past Friday, President Biden signed a bill to avert a nationwide rail strike, preventing an economic crisis that would have had far-reaching effects all across the country and, of course, the economy. The bill was passed by both the U.S. House and Senate last week and calls for pay raises for rail workers, among other concessions. Joining me now to talk about this and the effect that it has on the nation and on Utah, the Executive Director of the Utah Inland Port Authority, Ben Hart. And Ben, thank you so very much for joining us here in person today. First of all, let's talk about the inland port right now. We've been hearing about the inland port for such a long time, the discussion, and it's honestly been a little confusing and heated at times.
Yes.
Where do things stand right now before we get to the actual rail issue?
Well, our organization's been in existence for about 4 years now, and I think it was created with the idea that we have to give Utah businesses and Utah shippers every advantage in the global marketplace. And unless we have an organization like ours that really represent Utah in that global conversation, we're going to start to lose ground. We can't do that, especially in this day and age. In 2022, we're more aware of how important the global economy is to our businesses here in Utah than we've ever been. So if we cannot ensure we have the greatest logistics system in the country and maybe the world, then we're going to start to lose ground. So it's critical that our organization is successful. We feel that burden, and we feel like we're charting a new course that ultimately will help us be successful and the state to be successful as well.
Other big factors in the conversation regarding inland port has been, are we or are we not going to take trucks and things off the roads? Are we going to be able to get things on rail? Is this ultimately, in the long run, going to be good for not only the economy, but for the environment?
Well, think about this. We have a tremendously intricate and complex logistics system here in the United States. If we're not efficient and use rail the way that we need to, all we're going to do is put more trucks on the road into a system that's already, bent and stressed. So we have to better and more efficiently use rail than what we have in the past. If we can have an organization, again, that helps our businesses bridge that dynamic and help get better access and opportunity through rail, then I think we're going to be all the more advantaged as a state, particularly economically. So we feel that burden again, and we feel like we're making headway in that direction.
What is physically and actually happening right now with the inland port?
Well, I think before we want to spend $1 billion on infrastructure and build something that really is large in production and impact, we want to make sure that we're developing the right it. There's a lot of ideas of what an inland port actually is. So what we're doing right now, we're taking a step back and we're saying, look, this has been very controversial. Let's bring in a vendor that really has the right global expertise, somebody that really has had experience developing logistics systems across the globe. Let's find the right it for the state of Utah. Instead of just assuming that it's an intermodal facility or a transloading facility, let's find the right thing. Let's do it in a public, transparent way and make sure that we're investing in something that really will have that generational impact for Utah businesses.
I think of some of the history that I've read over the years, and boy, when somebody starts talking about, back in the old days, it would have been like a fireman's strike on the old locomotives and so on. I know Theodore Roosevelt dealt with that. Many presidents have dealt with the threats of and the reality of rail strikes. How big a deal would a rail strike be in the United States today?
Not just devastating, crippling. I mean, so many aspects of our life are dependent on rail that we're not aware of. We're all immersed in the global economy, whether we recognize it or not. From the clothes that we wear to the food that we eat, we are all part of the global economy. We live it every day. If that shuts down, we start to understand just how involved we are in that system. And it's kind of funny when we're talking about toilet paper, not so funny when we're talking about pharmaceuticals. And so we have to ensure that we've got a logistics system that's working, that is efficient, and that really is dynamic. And so the threat of that strike and the ability to hopefully avert it this week was critical for our economy, especially when we're at a critical tipping point. We're talking about a recession. Right now, in particular, it would have been really, really devastating.
As I mentioned, so many presidents have been threatened with this or have had to deal with the realities, even to the point of, basically bringing in, the Army's military in order to run the rails, or at least the threat of that. Harry Truman, for example. In your opinion, how was this handled? Have we done the right thing? Many Americans don't even completely at this point understand what has transpired.
Yeah, Doug, fundamentally, this whole strike and this whole conversation, it came down to that relationship between employer and worker. It's a relationship that all of us deal with, on a daily basis, but that's what was at the heart of this. Can we get an agreement in place that treated labor and treated the workers in a way that they felt was respectful and ultimately allowed them to help run the nation's rail system? And that was what it was at the heart of this issue. And ultimately, something as simple as sick leave was a really important component to this whole very complex issue. We hope that that's been averted, but it comes down to workforce shortages and workers' rights. And ultimately, that's not just a dynamic that's very relevant in rail, but is across the economy right now.
Right.
Workforce shortages and workforce issues are really, really threatening our economy.
You used a word in the description of what has transpired that I hear a lot when it comes to government today, is we hope that this is going to work. We hope that we've gone far enough. Far too often there's always the tagline, well, we've kicked this can down the road. So what are you anticipating? Is this something that's going to stick for a while, or are we going to be dealing with this again soon?
Well, Doug, it's not just this issue. Right now within global logistics, there are so many issues. It's nearshoring, reshoring. Are we actually bringing production jobs back to the United States? A lot of businesses that we're working with in global suppliers are talking about diversifying out of China. Like we're seeing kind of this massive global recalibration in terms of supply chain and logistics and also where your producers are. And so it's not just a one and done by any stretch. And I think a lot of people wish they had a crystal ball right now to know what the next 6, 12, 18 months are going to look like. We don't. And so we're going to go into the darkness, but hopefully for this issue, it's put to bed, and now we can start to focus on some of those other issues. But we hope there's an opportunity when this is through this effort as well to reshore some of those jobs, bring in automation, really look at some of these durable, future-facing industries. How do we make sure that Utah is at the forefront of that conversation?
Ben, we appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We're going to take a brief break, and we'll be right back with more of Sunday Edition. Stay with us. And welcome back to Sunday Edition. This past midterm election, Davis County voters approved a $475 million bond for new schools and improvements to outdated buildings. The race was expectedly close, but in the end, more than 66,000 Davis County voters approved the issuance of the bonds. Nearly 50,000 did not. And here to talk about the bond and the impact on Davis County and its residents is the Director of Communications for the Davis School District, Chris Williams. And Chris, it's very good to have you on the program. It's good to chat with you again. And first of all, let's talk about how the bond passed, and were the numbers pretty much expected from the school district and from leadership within the county?
Doug, thanks for having me on. Yeah, we had some work done for us back in the spring by Y2 Analytics, and they predicted about a 58% voter approval, and it was 57%. So they know their stuff. Yeah. And we worked really hard. We appreciate the voters who came out and supported us in that bond proposal. We can do lots of things now because they've given us that ability to do so.
Over the last several years, I've looked at some of the bonds that have been passed, and some have not passed in other areas of the state. But it seems that the big issues are accessibility, security, safety, and ironically, the technology. Some of these old buildings, they were just not built for the kind of technology and the electrical usage, the plug-ins, all kinds of things. How big a deal and what were the priorities for picking the buildings that need to be rebuilt and the buildings that need to be refurbished?
Yeah, great question. We have a really in-depth process in which we look at the needs of all our 92 schools, and we send out surveys to people who work in the buildings, to parents, to custodians, to find out what the needs are in the buildings. And so when those buildings rise to the top of the greatest need, those are the buildings that we include in those bond proposals. So the first building was Sunset Junior High School, built in 1953, has no air conditioning. And you can't imagine going anywhere without any air conditioning, but we have lots of students who still go to Sunset Junior High School. They get a great education, but they do it without any air conditioning. The second building was Bountiful Elementary School, built in 1950. That school doesn't have an elevator. And so it's very challenging for students who need an elevator to go up and down stairs, and they just can't do that. So those were the two critical needs that we had as far as replacing buildings. We have growth in the northwest part of the county, and so we need to add an additional junior high school in West Point, as well as an elementary school in the northwest part of the county. I'm not exactly sure where that's going to be right now, but not all the county is growing, but the northwest part is growing, and so those were the big projects in the bond.
Chris, how big is the seismic factor? I know at Envision Utah, they are always talking about how important it is for us to reinforce unreinforced masonry buildings and some of the dangers that we have because of the earthquake area that we live in. How big a deal was that in your decision to prioritize schools?
You know, it's definitely part of the big picture. We don't have enough money to retrofit all of our schools to meet those seismic guidelines. But as we put on new roofs, we tie the roofs to the walls so that if there's a quake, that roof stays connected to the walls. That structure may not be inhabitable to continue to have school there, but it will it will give people the opportunity to vacate the building so that wall doesn't, so the roof doesn't come down and the walls don't collapse. So that's the main issue when it comes to seismic challenges we have in our schools. Like I said, we have 92 schools. This bond was for $475 million. It doesn't address every need we have out there, but the most critical.
Let's talk for just a moment about the safety of students when it comes to just the world we live in now. I know it was years ago, Ben Horsley and I talked about the bond that the Granite School District was proposing, and it did ultimately pass, but they kept pointing to Skyline High School, and I actually went to Skyline High School, and they said, you cannot believe how many entrances there are to that high school, how difficult it is to control access to Skyline High School. Are you finding that to be an issue with some of the older buildings in your district?
Oh yeah, no question. When they were built, we didn't have any concerns for safety. So when you have a building that has an office, let's say in the middle of the structure, that isn't out near windows where people are entering and exiting the building, it makes it very challenging. So what we've done is we've put video cameras pretty much everywhere, but right at the door, we have doorbells that ring, a video will come up, a person will tell the individual on the other side of the camera why they're there. They will show ID. When all that is checked out, they will be allowed to enter the building. But yeah, it is challenging with some of these old buildings. We do have secure vestibules where people have to enter and they cannot get past that without showing some ID, proof of why they're there. So we have definitely taken a lot of steps to make our buildings more secure. We have lots of cameras out there, and we always say the best cameras we have are every individual in the school and in the community. If they see something that's out of the ordinary, report it. If they see something, hear something, report it, and that's the best security system we have in our district.
Chris, a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today on Sunday Edition, and thanks to all of you who are watching right now. We hope you'll be joining us again next week. And music and the spoken word, that's coming up next.